Many thanks for the invitation, and very good to see so many people involved in this webinar. Lewis, if I could move to the first slide. I'm just waiting to see if Lewis can move to the first slide of the presentation. Thank you very much, Lewis. Maybe the first point to make is that we are still in the pilot phase of the European Innovation Council. We're still under Horizon 2020 rules, and we will be expecting changes and are working on changes that will be introduced under the Horizon Europe programme, and I'll say a few words at this at the end. So what are we looking for? We're looking for very much innovations in the breakthrough, deep tech, disruptive area that create new markets. But we also support quite a portfolio of different types of innovations. We see that innovations are very varied. You cannot put an innovation into a single category. So these are the evaluation criteria in terms of the novelty, the impact, the excellence, and the team and the business plan. But it is important to say, you know, we are a very open program with the European Innovation Council piloting for the future, and now we do support a wide range of different types of innovations and different profiles. If I can move to the next slide, Lewis. I'm just waiting for the slide to move to the next one. What do we offer? We offer, and one of the European added values here is the substantial funding that we are able to provide. So it's grant funding up to 2.5 million euros. That's for projects up to TRL levels, up to TRL level 8. We also, since October last year, provide the option of equity investment, the blended finance, and there we offer an equity investment of up to 15 million euros. It's important to say that up until now, we've seen a wide range of equity requests. I think we have selected projects with the full range from up to, in some cases, the full 15 million euros. And in other cases, down to 0.5 million euros. So we see that there's a very wide range of ticket sizes for the investment that are both offered, requested and offered. If I can move to the next slide. So we are aiming for something which is very simple. It is very bottom up. I'll say a word about the Green Deal call in a minute. We're avoiding prescriptiveness, and it's very important for us that we can really capture the disruptive innovations that don't fit neatly into one technology or one sector or one market area. So throughout the European Innovation Council pilot in future, we're trying to keep it as open as possible to really new ideas. We try to keep it flexible. And it's important to say that there are, no geographical constraints or criteria. So it is very much the approach of a merit-based approach, where we select the best companies, and we don't have quotas or other geographical considerations in the selection. If I move to the next slide. We are also, and I think this is a process that will become more pronounced under Horizon Europe, we are moving to a more proactive management style. So certainly we have at the moment a more or less continuously open process, and that's something we would like to build on in the future. We try to be as fast as possible. The time to inform is around 6 weeks from the application, and that is the information about whether the company has been invited to interview. We try to use the language of the market, so it's very accessible for startups, SMEs that are not used to European programs. And one of the novelties that we will start with this year, and we plan to expand in future, is to recruit in the Commission what we call program managers, who will be people with expertise in either their technological or market field, and will therefore be able to interact with our projects, with our companies, to help them develop. If I move to the next slide, Lewis. We are aiming for an approach which is really putting the innovator at the center, designing everything we do that will work for SMEs, for startups. Our funding, we're working, and Augustin will say some more words about the equity side, but we try to take a very founder-friendly approach with our equity. And of course, the grant funding is non-dilutive. We are also providing the business acceleration services. Our feedback from our companies is that this is very much appreciated. And again, this is something that we are looking to build on in the future. I'll move to the next slide. So an overview of how the process works: from the submission of proposals. The remote evaluation takes normally around 3 to 4 weeks. We then look at the ranking of the proposals against the evaluation criteria, and we identify those proposals which are highest ranked up until approximately twice the budget available. Those are the companies that we invite to the interview, and therefore at the interview there's a roughly 50% chance of a company coming to the interview to receive funding. If it is successful, we move to the grant agreement. That normally takes around 3 months, but we're looking for ways to accelerate that. In the case of a blended finance, after the interview, the due diligence will start. And indeed, the due diligence has started for many of the companies that, if not all of the companies that were selected from the October cutoff and from the January cutoff. And then we will separately make the equity investment. If I move to the next slide. So we had a revision of the work programme for 2020. This introduced some important novelties. We pre-published the revised work programme in February to provide more notice about these changes. So we have introduced, for the May cutoff of the EIC Pilot Accelerator, a thematic approach based on the Green Deal. And so it's the first time since we've entered the pilot that we are implementing a more thematic approach. This kind of approach is foreseen as well under Horizon Europe rules, although the majority of the funding will remain bottom up. There is a budget of just over 300 million, which is the largest budget ever we've had for a cutoff. The deadline is the 19th of May. The applications need to demonstrate that they will have an impact on at least one of the Green Deal objectives. The Green Deal objectives are quite broad. They cover CO2 reductions, they cover waste, they cover biodiversity, they cover a range of different things. So we expect to get a wide range of different proposals. And of course, here we're not determining which technology or which sector. It's really about the impacts. We will then have our final cutoff under the Horizon 2020 programme on the 7th of October, and that will be a fully open cutoff. The other novelty we've introduced is that we have seen that there are very few of the companies that we support who have a woman in a leadership position. We've looked at the last 2 calls, and if we look at the CEO position, which for us is the easiest way of having this category of women-led companies, we see it's below 10%. What we have introduced, and it will apply for the May and October cutoffs, and it's a pilot for us to learn, is that when we construct the list of companies to invite to interviews, we will look at those companies that have a woman CEO, and this is part of the application forms now. In case the number of companies with a woman CEO is below 25%, 1/4 of all of the companies that we will invite to interview, we will invite additional companies going down the ranking list who have a woman CEO. When the company comes to the interview, to the juries, there will be no consideration of the gender of the CEO. As usual, we expect the CEO to be there for the interviews, and so the jury panels will take their decisions on the go or no go for the funding. But we hope this measure will attract more companies with a woman CEO and give more opportunity, but maintain the fact that we will fund from the European level the best interviews. If I move, the best companies rather. If I move to the next slide. I wanted to say a few words about the cutoff in March. As many of you will have seen, this was an open call, but what we did some days before the deadline is to encourage, in particular, companies, SMEs, startups that had an innovation that was relevant for the coronavirus. This attracted a lot of attention, and we know a lot of companies had to put together applications with a very short time frame. We also saw that the number of applications was more than double what we have received in the past. So we've had to take slightly longer for the remote evaluations purely because of the volume of applications that we received. Our estimation is that around 1,400 of these proposals are really tackling some aspect of coronavirus, either the medical or the wider economic and social impacts. But leaving those aside, we've also seen an increase of about 1/3 in non-coronavirus related applications. What we've proposed to member states, and this was discussed at a meeting with ministers and we are discussing now with the programme committee, is to have an additional budget that will be used to support coronavirus relevant proposals. That would mean that the initial budget foreseen, which is around 164 million, would be used for all applications in a very open way. But we would have this additional amount that would be available to support the most excellent coronavirus relevant proposals. We hope that we can announce this amount in the next week or the next week or two, such that it is clear by the time we move to the interviews. As I mentioned, we've put back the interviews. There will be a slightly longer period given the number of companies that we need to interview from the 11th to the 20th of May. And we would hope, as we've always done, that very soon after these interviews, we will be able to announce which companies have got funding, and the companies themselves will be notified very quickly. If I move to the next slide. There's also a number of other actions we have taken across the Commission and in DG Research and Innovation to respond to the coronavirus outbreak and the crisis. There is a website established, and you will have the link in the slides when it's circulated to this dedicated website, which provides all of the funding opportunities. We are organising over this weekend a pan-European hackathon where we have identified around 20 challenges that we are asking innovators to try and develop solutions. We will be following up on some of the best of the solutions. We want to set up a platform that will allow us to really further discussions. There are a number of pitching events. We've had one for investors. On the 30th of April, we will have a pitching event with procurers, and this is being used for the companies that we are supporting, but we are looking to ways to open up these pitching events to other companies, particularly companies that have been awarded the Seal of Excellence. If I move to the next slide. So our experience from the first two cutoffs that have offered blended finance is that it's highly attractive. We've seen close to 2,000 applications each time. We saw, as I just mentioned, more than double of that for the March cutoff. We have invited close to 200 companies each time to the interviews, and we've selected so far around 120 companies. So the success rate is quite low. It's quite a competitive program. We have seen also that the quality of proposals overall is extremely good. So about 1/3 of the proposals have passed the threshold. So this means that we have been issuing a very large number of seals of excellence, over 1,000 of these in the last two cut-offs, and something that we will be working on very hard in the Commission, but also with other funders, structural fund authorities, foundations, others, investors, is to really give more visibility to the seals of excellence and more support to the seals of excellence. So one of the changes that we've introduced in the application forms from now on, we ask companies to give consent that we can share their identity if they receive a seal of excellence with other funders. This will help make the link to other funders that want to support. The other thing that we've seen is a fairly stable position in terms of the request for blended finance, around 1/4 of the proposals. And when we look at the outcome of the evaluations, we see that it's about 50-50, about half-half between blended finance and grant only. But when we look at the budget, we see that about 3/4 of the budget is going to blended finance and around 1/4 to grant only. If I pass to the next slide. Both this slide and the next one, this one gives a little bit of a view on the thematics. What we will be working on is more detailed analysis of exactly which areas and what are the new areas emerging. So this is kind of broad sectoral breakdown, and we see a fairly stable position in terms of ICT, health, engineering technologies, and this is what we've seen throughout the EIC pilot. If I move to the next slide. You'll see here the results in terms of the country of location of the 120 or so companies. So we see that's quite a widespread, but certainly one of the things that we will be looking for, and we really need the help of the NCPs, is in terms of the applications from widening countries, from Central and Eastern Europe. We see that the success rates are similar, but we would really like to see more applications come from these countries. I move to the next slide. In terms of preparing the future, but also getting the advice about the current pilot, we've had since the autumn last year a new advisory board. It's a quite diverse advisory board with entrepreneurs, researchers, investors, ecosystem builders. They have met 4 times. We had their 4th meeting as a virtual meeting yesterday. The board has also agreed a vision statement setting out what it believes is important for the EIC in the future, and that should be published very soon. We will also be looking at the board's advice for the first work programme for the EIC under Horizon Europe. They've been looking at key performance indicators. They've been looking at improvements to the application and the evaluation system. They've been looking at the Pathfinder. They've been looking at the branding and communication and how we really communicate very clearly about the EIC to different audiences. So there should be the vision statement from the board being published very soon. And following that, we expect them to publish a number of more detailed recommendations that will then feed into the implementation under Horizon Europe. If I then move to, I think, the final slide. So some of the questions that were, I think, asked in advance, in terms of the remote evaluation, I'm not sure if this question was about the current remote evaluations. We expect for the call at the moment, these remote evaluations are being concluded at the moment. but it's also in terms of the face-to-face interviews. Given the current circumstances, we are preparing and testing the systems to conduct the face-to-face interviews in a virtual environment. So this will be a new element for us. It's part of the reason that we have extended the period for the face-to-face interviews, because we believe we need a bit more time to test the systems and to conduct the interviews. But we are ready for the May interviews to conduct these online. On complementary proposals, we have added a specific point on this in the FAQ document. As before, if you have a running SME instrument EIC pilot grant, you cannot apply for another separate one at the same time. You have to wait until your current grant has been completed. However, if it is a complement to your existing proposal, in particular, if you have a grant proposal and you would like to apply for a blended finance, this is possible. And the kind of conditions for this are set out, I think, fairly clearly in the FAQ document. In terms of the health tech, the pharma industry, clinical trials are eligible. We fund a lot of, if you've seen, a lot of companies in the health sector. So we support clinical trials. They do fall into the technology readiness levels 6 to 8, which is what we fund with the grant. And of course, we are able to fund with the equity as well. We are aware that the grant amount is not sufficient for many of the, particularly the later stages clinical trials, which is part of the idea of the equity. In terms of Horizon Europe, we do have from the Council and Parliament an agreed text with all of the rules for the European Innovation Council and the priorities. What we don't have, of course, is the budget. We don't have the provisions for the Association of Third Countries, and we don't have all the provisions for the synergies with other programs, including the structural funds. So we are in the hands of the Council, the Parliament, the European leaders to agree a budget and to finalise the legislation for Horizon Europe. From the Commission side, we will be ready to launch Horizon Europe from the start of 2021. There's a lot of preparatory meetings going on, work going on. We will start with the shadow program committees. We will have a first meeting. There will be a specific program committee for the EIC. There will be a specific work program for the EIC, separate from the rest of the Horizon Europe work program. So I can't give a date at the moment for when the first cut-off is, because it does not depend on the Commission, it depends on the negotiations. But certainly we're aware that with the last cut-off being in October, we will do our best to have a cut-off as early as possible. But it's also important for you to be aware that we'll be introducing a number of changes based on the advice of our board, in terms of how the applications will work, what the work program looks like, and the in-depth discussions on this will start over probably around the summer and certainly in the autumn, and there will be much more information available. I will stop there and pass to my colleague Augustin, but I stay here for the questions and I'm looking at all of the comments that are coming into the chat box. So thank you very much, Antonio.